take a look at our outline and just see where we've been, see where we're going. We're in chapter 4 of James, so we're moving right along. James chapter 1, we looked at a living faith in trials and temptation. So we looked at trials and wisdom. We looked at how patient endurance in trials, James chapter 1, 2 through 4. We looked at how to receive the wisdom you need from God, James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to everyone who asks, basically. Doesn't chide you for asking, doesn't scold you for asking. So it's a very important verse. That he talked about the waves of the sea, rising up in faith, crashing down in doubt. Don't be a two-souled individual, James chapter 1 and verse 8, double-minded, in other words. Living for the Lord in times of temptation. So remember, we're talking about the difference in pyrosmos, between what is trying your faith, or the fires of faith that mold and shape your faith into being somebody who endures, presses on to that point of maturing, or the flip side of that, but it's the same word, so it's the same sensation, it's the same fire, but the other side of that is to tilt towards being enticed into sin. So knowing the difference between the two, then knowing the dynamics of temptation. So James goes into that in depth. And he says there's a blessing for those who endure temptation, James chapter 1 verse 12, how temptation comes, how temptation works, James chapter 1, 13 through 16. God's goodness stands in contrast to the temptations we face. Remember, he talked this idea about shifting these heavenly bodies. God's goodness cannot be eclipsed. Every good and perfect gift comes from above, or it's raining down from above. We talked about that. Standing firm against unrighteous anger, standing firm against the lusts of the flesh, how to receive the Word of God. Remember talking about the importance of the implanted Word of God, and examples of what it means to be a doer of Word. Be a doer of the Word, not just a hearer only, and then deceiving your own self. So much in chapter 1 that has to do with trials, how trials perfect our faith, how we need to be people that endure and stand strong. So important. Just we understand the nature of temptation, the nature of trials. Just we don't confuse the two, and that we press on and endure. Chapter 2, then, he's talking about living faith in the life of the church. So not to lose sight of the centrality of what James is talking about, faith. So faith is not just something that we believe in our minds, but it is what we represent in the totality of our person. It's not just the body of Christian doctrine, but it's who we are as a believer ourselves, how that manifests in our life, most importantly. So he said, what is it about the faith that is demonstrated in my life? This is critical to James, because James is a very, very practical person. So James talks about, what does this look like in the community life of the church? Partiality and discrimination. Remember, we talked about that in chapter 2. And he establishes this principle about how is it that you hold this faith? And he's going to talk about this law of liberty. He's going to describe that, which is essentially how this faith manifests itself in your life. An example of the kind of partiality that has no place among Christians. Remember, we talked about the guy with all the gold rings coming in, that's the rich person, and he's given preferential treatment, seated in the front, and then the poor person is sort of, well, I don't know about you, I'll put you somewhere. This kind of thing is such an egregious example that it just ought not to be the case. So human partiality rarely agrees with God's heart. It doesn't agree with God's heart. Chapter 2, verses 5 through 7, such that it's condemned by the Scriptures, James says in chapter 2, verses 8 through 9, the serious matter of obeying all God's commands then in chapter 2, verses 10 through 13. Remember, he goes into elaborate detail about how the idea, just the basic principle of law then, that you either obey it should be taken as a unity then. Because he's really trying to emphasize the point of unity. Just remember this, the point of unity, and comparing that to the nature of law, that the point of the law then, or the basic principle of law, is not just that you take one and be selective about it, this one, this one, this one, this one, to the neglect of the rest of them. No, the idea of the law is that it's a composite. It is law that we are to be governed by. And so you carry that over from something like the Mosaic law to the law of liberty, and it is that law of liberty that is to govern us. And you accept it as a whole. It is that governing principle in its totality that is to rule and have dominion over us. And this is the point that James is trying to make. It is that law of liberty to which we yield full control. And that's the idea of the faith that James is trying to engender. You accept all of it, everything, all of Christ, the fullness of the Spirit, everything, that we just yield all of our lives over to Christ and to Him. So this whole idea of showing partiality just makes no sense whatsoever, this discriminating kind of spirit. It is so antithetical to the values and principles of God. Then he talks about the demonstration of a living faith in loving action. This idea about mercy, the idea about love, and he brings into the discussion the very nature of God. So he establishes the principle, true faith accompanied by action, the example of the difference between living faith and dead faith. And he's framing this then, as you recall, because this is a very contested part of the epistle, although when we break it down, it's really not controversial at all. But he's framing this within the life of Abraham. And the idea of what's a living faith, what's a dead faith, and if you recall, he uses the examples of Abraham and Rahab. But let's just say in particular Abraham. You remember Abraham in Genesis 15, he believes God. Genesis 15 verse 6, he believes God is counted unto him as righteousness. In other words, he's justified based on his belief in God. And so he's justified by God because of his faith, which is basic Pauline theology. So there's no contradiction between Paul and James. This is basic, by you place your faith in what God said is the object of your faith. You place your faith there, and you are justified. And so you then bring that back to James, who says that the works follow. The works follow the saving act, and so as evidence of the work of grace that's occurred in your life. And so when he says that Abraham was justified because, or demonstrated his justification, that is his faith, by offering Isaac, this occurred in Genesis chapter 22, which was after Genesis chapter 15, because he was already justified. Therefore, his faith bore the fruit of works. So it's quite evidently seen what James is trying to prove. This is a living faith, because Abraham possessed the faith. Genesis chapter 22 and verse 1, God tested Abraham. What did he test? This was the verb parasmos in the Septuagint. He put fire to Abraham's faith, the faith that he already possessed. It bore fruit. God already knew it was there. He wanted to expose it, bore the fruit of the action that Abraham offered his son, indeed followed through on his obedience to God, and so on. So it's a living faith. not a dead faith, because a dead faith is no faith. Now, this is a point that James, not Abraham, James is trying to make. Abraham displays. Rahab does the same thing. Abraham's an example of living faith, James 2:20-24. Rahab's an example of living faith, James 2:25 and 26. And we move from there to maybe something else that kind of models then, if you have living faith, then how do you model this faith? How is this faith to be modeled? How is it that we live the Christian life? And he gives warnings in chapter 3 then. We'll look last time at chapter 3, warnings to teachers. But basically he uses teaching as a construct to expose this idea of the tongue, and basically using the tongue as a way to determine, are you spiritually mature? And saying, well, consider what you say and consider what you do. So just a couple of ways to determine if you are a person of spiritual maturity. That is the Spirit of God the one who is the agent of your spiritual maturity? That is to say, is the Spirit of God the one who is governing your self-control? If that makes any sense at all. Because self-control, that means I'm in control. But have you yielded your control to the working of the Spirit? In other words, the agency of the Spirit who's in you. And this would be basically Galatians chapter 5, 22 and 23. The fruit of the Spirit, and the last thing of the ninefold, those aspects of the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. And this is an operation of the Spirit of God. And so he said, well, here's a couple ways to know whether or not your faith is operating according to a spiritually mature model, is about the tongue. And so if you take the construct of a teacher, and of course back then in the synagogue, he's noticing obviously that everybody's wanting to jump up and have their word and have their say and give their evaluation and having their voice heard and something like this. And so he's saying, well, hey, a lot of tongues flapping. And so he's just noticing this, and without rehashing all of that again, because we don't want to do that, but just saying there are two things there to notice. And one is what you say, and the other is what you do. And so he points to meekness. Meekness has to do with the governing factor of how you act. Do you act with meekness? Is that the litmus test for your actions? In other words, are you benefiting someone else? Is your tongue under control? And are your actions under control? If your tongue's under control, that would be a significant amount of humility there. If your actions are under control, that's a significant amount of meekness there. That's power under control and reservation. You're using your actions to serve the purposes of someone else and not yourself. Your tongue is building up someone else. Your tongue is being used to encourage and support and bring wisdom and things of this nature. So as we get towards the end of chapter 3 then what's coming into focus then is kind of two categories. And in two categories, let's say one from above, wisdom from above, and wisdom from below. And there's what is to be preferred then, if we're talking about then speech and something of benefit, then are these positive things, which he sort of summarizes then. The wisdom from above is first pure. This is chapter 3 and verse 17. Then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy, good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. And there's a spiritually mature person. That's a person you want to be around. That's a person in the community of faith that is going to be strengthening, building up other believers. But wow, who wants 16? Jealousy, selfish ambition, disorder, and every evil thing. Who wants that? So what we have at work here are kind of like two options. There isn't a lot of middle ground in there. It's like either this or it's this. And it was that way with the tongue. It's either this or it's this. It's that way with your actions. It's either this or it's this. And you really get that if you read the Apostle Paul, you're going to get that. It's either the flesh, acting in the flesh, or acting according to the Spirit. There is really no middle ground. It's either I am sitting on the throne of my life, or Jesus is enthroned by the Spirit of God and governing my life. And James is just going to use this language. This is the life of faith. This is the law of liberty. The law of liberty governing your life. Mercy, truth, love, things of this nature. James is going to frame it a little bit differently, but he's going to get to the same place. So as he rolls into, and you have to understand, which you do very well, when this was originally written or read to the folks, there's no chapter divisions, there's no verse divisions, things of this nature. It's just flowing into the next. James is just going to keep flowing right into this. And he goes from 18, and the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. But then you see chapter 4 in our English text. It's just going to say, but chapter 4, what is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? Well, what's this I see? What's this I see? Just like when we started chapter 3, it was, wait a minute. What are all these teachers? What's everybody? He's just observing this, and so he goes to the tongue. He says, wait a minute, let's just start talking about spiritual maturity, and let's deal with your words and your actions. Let's divide it up in these two categories and see what we can do with that. And out of these two categories, words and actions, let's talk about the wisdom that's above and the wisdom that's below. And James seems to be very good at dividing everything into two options. And now he's going to settle in here and say, wait a minute. He's been pretty good at centering everything on this theme of unity right along, this idea of unity. For example, when you go back and you get the idea about they're in the synagogue, and the rich person comes in, they got all the rings on, or at least proposes this model, whether this actually happened or not, or whether he's just using this as an example. Suppose this happens. Well, let's say that this was an actual case, that some affluent individual comes in, they've got all the rings and everything, look at me, look at my social status, whatever people do, to just show how important they are. And they come walking into the assembly, and there's, oh, wow, no, give them preferential treatment. Who knows? They might put a lot of money in the offering. Who knows? But give them preferential, seat them up here in the front. I've been in meetings where, the mayor, I can remember. Was it, this is in Europe, and I was in one city where I was speaking at the 75th anniversary this was the anniversary of the building of this chapel that they had. And I was speaking at this event, and they had the mayor of the city was there, and we're all seated there. You know how this is. Okay, we're all seated here at the front. There wasn't a lot of pomp and circumstance, but it was just a dignified event, so they're going to seat people appropriately at the front, or something like this. So you know how this goes. People are just being seated and ushered in like this. And imagine, somebody's coming in like this, but it's the attitude towards, somebody who is poor, and to treat them in a poor way. But what James is offended by, more than the action, is the lack of unity. You say, whoa, wait a minute. Wait a minute. There is no status among the people of God. There is no big or small. Everybody's medium. There is no you know, as we say, the ground is level at the foot of the cross. You know, it's just us. You know, it's just us. So what is all this, you know, preferential stuff? And so James is more concerned with maintaining the unity, as Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, maintaining the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And so this is what James is about. And then when he comes into James chapter 4, he says, what is the source of quarrels? And this is the idea of quarrels and conflicts among you. This may be in the New American Standard, you know, kind of tamping down the translation a little bit, you know, because when you have in the original, you know, it's like, where do wars and fights come in among you? Because in the original, you have polemos and maki. Polemos and maki are the Greek term. And polemos refers to physical battles, like physical battles between nations. And so if you're talking about Russia and Ukraine or something like that, you know, you say actually that would be the term that you would attach to it. And make would be, you know, like some incursion between two armies, you know, like some intense strife that takes place. Like, so you have war, which is the broader, you know, description of like there's the Russian-Ukrainian war, but if you're talking about something that broke out today and the two armies are fighting, so there'd be make, there'd be these two, this would be a particular, the battle that occurred within the war, something like that, but a very intense strife, like the Battle of Gettysburg that took place within the Civil War, something like that. So these are very graphic terms that refer to actual battles. And the reason why, and you say, well, why would the New American Standard or something like that then translate it like quarrels and conflicts? Why would it seemingly tamp that down and not say like wars and something like that, where maybe the King James or Authorized Version, some of the older translations would have had it that way, and maybe steer away from the more graphic, I want to say literal rendering of that, as though it were an actual physical altercation, physical battle. And so this would be why maybe the New American Standard would do that, because it doesn't want to depict an actual physical battle, like these Christians were having a holy war against each other. These Christians were having an actual physical fighting it out, you know, type of battle, which they were not having a physical battle, yet to preserve that, I think the original word could be helpful, because I think what they were doing is worthy of those terms, you know, wars and fights. I think it helps to have that imagery in your brain, and to carry that into just and to say to believers that are contending that way, see, do you really realize what's going on here? I mean, in the spiritual realm, with you people fussing at each other the way you are, and with you people contending the way you are, with you being factious the way you are, this is on a spiritual level just as dangerous to the health of this community as it is to any physical war, which it is. How many relationships are destroyed? How many friendships are destroyed? How many churches are destroyed? And when you think about it, right? When you think about it, and you may not have lived long enough or been in churches long enough to know what a church, we call them church splits, or when people leave churches, or when churches are destroyed and sometimes churches close, or this is a terrible thing, because it's a horrible witness to a community, you know, to see that. Christians, What's going on? Wars, fights. Internally, that can be within one congregation, but it also can be various congregations, kind of fussing with one another. Sometimes a church will divide. Another church will go and start someplace else, and these two will fuss with each other. Or one denomination may hold theological viewpoints that, and we're talking about secondary issues here, that another denomination may not align with, well, let's just say don't align with. And so sometimes there can be contention between the two. So James is using this kind of language, and he's going to address this here. And that's his subject in chapter 4. That's his subject in chapter 4, at least at the outset here. And what's his trajectory? Where's he going with this? What's his point? Because James will start out with something, but then, this is sort of on the surface level. He'll start out with something he notices, and it's important because especially if you're one of the counseling students, this will mean something to you, because you get what's called a presenting problem, right? Because you have someone comes in and they're giving you all of the ideations of these things. You're getting all the, but okay, fine. And if you're trying to, diagnose, or you're trying to, find some remedy in all the spectrum of what they're telling you, you better reserve judgment, because there's usually stuff way down here that you got to filter through. And so James is going to get to the root of the matter. And the root of the matter is a lack of humility. And so here's all this stuff. Here's all the fightings and the wars and the quarrels and all the noise up here. And he's going to reduce it down to this pinpoint down here of humility and this need for humility. And if you even just let your eyes go down, like in verse 10, humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you. Humble yourself. Just imagine that. Imagine that if you have two quarreling factions and just butting heads against each other. How about just humbling yourself before God? Humbling yourself before God. It seems so reductionistic. It seems so simple. But this is where James is going. That's the ultimate trajectory. So he says, where do wars and fights come from amongst you? James is accurately describing strife among Christians in terms of wars and fights. And so he's saying, yes, even among Christians, you can have battles that become bitter and severe. And he says, do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? So now he's saying, where do these come from? So we know that there's some contention going on, but what is the source of this? And so he says that there's some root of this in the flesh. In other words, it's an internal war within the believer, and this is ultimately rooted in their own desires. This desire for pleasure. Now, we've talked about self-control. We've talked about, this idea of the self. So how this militates against humility. And we've talked about the issue of pride, and all of these things weigh in. The self, the pride, I want what I want, the whole emphasis on me, and those types of things are so antithetical to the life of Christ in us and the life that he wants to produce through the agency of the Spirit through us. Cannot exist where there are things like selfish ambition, chapter 3, verse 16, can't coexist with that, I should say. No two believers who are both walking in the Spirit, and this is Galatians 5, 16 through 25, walk in the Spirit, live by the Spirit, keep in step with the Spirit, those three things are mentioned there. No two believers who are both walking in the Spirit of God towards each other can live with wars and fights among themselves. So things are completely out of hand. And so James is just rooting this in desires. Something has gone wrong at the level of desires. So this is not the outworking of their faith. This is not the fruit of the Spirit. He mentions covetousness. He says, you lust and do not have. You commit murder. You are envious and cannot obtain, and you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you ask not. So we have to break this down. We have to break this down a little bit. But he says your desires for pleasures that war in your members, and he says that covetousness. This is the term here. Envious. This is zeloo, and it means to be zealous after someone else's possessions. It speaks for itself, right? When you hear that term, and this just leads to conflict. You're lusting after something that you don't have. He brings up this term murder. So you commit murder, and this seems, and this is the actual term that he uses. This is where, and he's not talking about physical murder here, but he's talking about someone who in their mind has reduced someone else to the point of non-existence, and I've known people to say something like, I had a funeral in my mind, to just put someone out of existence, as if I don't care about them. I don't care about their concerns. I don't care about it. It's just to completely obliterate them out of one's mind, to have completely no thought for them whatsoever, to be so self-absorbed with your own pursuits. And this is that, that zeloo. This is you are envious, and cannot obtain. You're so desiring after something you must have yourself, and someone else is getting in the way of that. So that's the addition to this issue. Someone else is getting in the way of that you must block that person out. So this is a very extreme thing. And James uses this to force his readers to realize the depth of this bitter hatred that they have towards each other. And so he says, you don't have, and this points to the futility of one's life if it's lived for your own personal desires. Because he says, well, you're envious and you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. As so there's something in here that is begging the question of, you're lacking things that are of spiritual necessity to you. Maybe you don't realize it, but the things that are of spiritual value to you, you don't have, and the reason you don't have them is because you're not asking for them. You're so bent on pursuing everything for yourself, and you're not succeeding in any way. This is so reminiscent of the book of Haggai. You really need to go back and just take a look. A very short book of Haggai. in Haggai. And if you remember, those exiles had returned back to the land. They were like 16 years and were fearful of what the people of the land were coming to them saying, don't rebuild, don't refortify. And they had originally laid the foundation of the temple, and then quit. And instead rebuilt their houses and things of that nature and took care of themselves, but left what God had commanded them to do, rebuild the temple, and forsaken that. And so they were judged for doing that. God judged them for that. And so you see that all in chapter 1, where they kept putting it off. And meanwhile, their crops weren't any good. They had great inflation. They didn't have enough to eat. Their clothes were wearing out. It was just horrible, miserable lives, until Haggai and Zechariah were coming and prophesying to them and trying to get them to renew and get about the Lord's work. And so it's the idea here that you have not because you ask not, because things aren't right between you and God. And so this is what James is trying to say. He's saying everything's all wrong. You're doing things the wrong way, the complete wrong. Everything is completely messed up. And what's messed up is the interpersonal relationships within the Christian community. This is not how this functions. You can't be coveting what somebody else has. You can't be at odds with other people. You're supposed to be united. You're supposed to be investing in the lives of other people. You're supposed to be building each other up. There's only one way that the faith works. There's only one way that the life of Christ is to be lived out, and it's not this way. It's not tearing each other down. It's building each other up. And so just to use the term murder, or it's just, you're just killing everything. You're destroying everything. And so you do not have. It's an absolutely futile existence. It's a fundamentally unsatisfied life. And if you ever arrive at that point and just say, I'm just so unsatisfied, this just isn't working, then you take a look around. And James gives you a way to diagnose things. Just what your relationships are broken. Something's going on here that needs to be set. Something's chaotic. Something's fractured. Something needs to be set back in order. Something is disconnected that needs to be reconnected. This is what happens when the flesh takes over and the Spirit of God is not in control. When you're seeking things based on the self and you're not walking in step with the Spirit. So this helps us to rationally understand the folly of living life after the lusts of the world and our own natural appetites. You're tempted to fulfill a sinful desire because you think that it may be satisfied, but it will never be satisfied. So what is James highlighting here? But he's going back to chapter 1 and saying, you see what happens? You see what happens when parasmos kicks in and the fires kick in. And rather than leaning towards being molded into the image of Christ, you press into enticement to sin. And when you press into enticement to sin, here comes the wars, here comes the quarrels, here comes the infighting, here comes the seeking after self, and so on. So, lack of satisfaction, number one. And beware of that. Just beware of that. Beware of the fundamental lack of satisfaction. What does Paul say in Philippians chapter 4? I've been up, I've been down, but I've learned to be content in all things. Because you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, and remember the serpent in the garden. Has God really said? And what is that? Planting the seeds of dissatisfaction. What did God give him? I'm just going to give you everything. Yeah, why not? Take it all. Go ahead. Yeah. No, you have everything. Just at one thing. Yeah, just that. But everything else, yeah, go for it. Everything. And I mean everything. Just the one thing. Just the one thing. And what does Satan point out? He says, are you kidding me? He gave you 99.9999. He didn't give you that? Oh. How miserable. How dissatisfying. So just beware of dissatisfaction. Beware of it, because this is where enticement to sin comes in, and before you know it, dissatisfaction just leads you down the path of fleshly living. You do not have because you do not ask. This is what he says. You do not have because you do not ask. So the reason these destructive desires exist among Christians is because they do not seek God for their needs. That is, you do not ask. You do not ask. So James reminds us here the great power of prayer. So you go all the way back to James chapter 1 and verse 5. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask. Let him ask. So we can unnecessarily live as spiritual paupers, in spiritual poverty. And I'm not talking about health, wealth, prosperity, things like that, or material stuff. I'm talking about spiritual poverty. To be spiritually impoverished, to be spiritually immature, because we don't have fundamentally a strong prayer life. And the more we seek things of the flesh, the more we seek self-satisfaction, the less prayer. You ask amiss. So he says, you ask and do not receive, verse 3, because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. You ask amiss. This is the word kakos, and it's an adverb. It says you ask badly, wrongly, or we could say contrary to the will of God. So what about those that do pray? Well, I pray, but I don't get anything. And he's saying it's because you ask badly. You ask with the wrong motives. You ask contrary to the will of God, so that you could spend it on your own pleasures. And he uses this term for pleasure here. It's not epithumia. It's not like the term for lust, but this is a term for self-gratification. In other words, the motive in my heart when I'm crying out to God is just gratify a point of my own self-interest. Gratify me. Gratify me. So imagine this. You say, but I pray, I read my Bible, I pray. But what if at the root of my desire is for God just to gratify my own self-interest? Instead of crying out to God and saying, God, be magnified. You be magnified in me at whatever the cost. Whatever the cost to me, you be magnified. You be magnified in me. I think our prayers just have to be inverted. We have to remember that the purpose of prayer is not to persuade a reluctant God to do our bidding. The purpose of prayer is to align our will with His. Remember Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, 6:10, Matthew. where he's saying, your kingdom come, your will be done. He's asking for God's will to be fulfilled in his life. And this is important. This is not our will to be performed. And what's important is where he says, on earth as it is in heaven. In the original, the order will say, as in heaven, so on earth. And I mean, this is the order that we have to get things in. It's not, God, you see the situation I'm in, you know who I am, and this is what we get these personal pronouns, I, me, and my. And this is what I need you to do for me, instead of, God, what do you need me to be? God, I'm here to receive from you what I need to live well in this situation. I need to receive the wisdom to be able to perform and do. That's James chapter 1 in verse 5. Spurgeon says, when a man so prays, he asks God to be his servant and gratify his desires. No worse than that, Spurgeon says. He wants God to join him in the service of his desires. He will gratify his desires, and God shall come and help him to do it. Such prayer is blasphemous. But a large quantity of it is offered, and it must be one of the most God-provoking things that heaven ever beholds, is this idea that a person just says, God, come and fulfill all my desires. The idea to spend is the same verb used to describe the wasteful spending of the prodigal son in Luke 15 and verse 14, that you might spend it on your pleasures. Remember that in the prodigal son. Oh, give to me. And then he went and spent it on his own. And so when you think of that image, just think of requesting things of God to spend on your own, to gratify your own desires, and take a step back and think, prayer is not some kind of spiritual currency, as though I have this prayer and I can spend it. I'm spending it now to get what I want. You think, what a horrible kind of concept that is. And yet how many believers think they can use prayer as a medium of exchange to call out to God for him in return. And you say, but these are holy things I'm asking God for. These are holy things because I want him to supply me with what? Whatever it is, if it has an I attached to it, we have to be careful. God knows who we are. He knows what we need. If we say, God, I'm your servant, just supply to your servant what your will is for me, to live and to serve you. And God will do that. You ask and do not receive because you ask for the wrong motives, that you may spend it on your desires. And James isn't finished. He's not finished here. It gets stronger, right? So here's a rebuke of compromise and covetousness among Christians. Covetousness. Adulterers and adulteresses. Imagine this. James, just for a second, think about this. He's just called them murderers. Now adulterers and adulteresses. these are folks in the diaspora. These are folks that have had their land taken away from them. These are folks that are really struggling, having it difficult. And right from the beginning, James is saying, you're going through the fires of trials, and you've got to have strong faith, and you've got to endure, and don't yield to temptation. And James is having them walk a straight line here. And this is important. And like the first century, we're living in difficult days. And this is the time to walk a straight line. This is a difficult society that we live in, and this is a difficult time to be in ministry, and we can't be equivocating, and we can't be double-minded, and we can't be, I don't know which side of the street I'm going to be on, and we've got to make a decision and stand strong. We have to be resolute. And he says, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. And so James is saying, draw a line and decide which side are you on? And the rebuke is presented in Old Testament vocabulary. God spoke this way in the Old Testament when he spoke to the nation of Israel. Do you remember? This is Jeremiah chapter 3, Ezekiel chapter 6, Ezekiel chapter 16, 23, Hosea chapter 3. When when those Old Testament writers like Jeremiah and Ezekiel, those prophets would call Israel for their adultery, their spiritual adultery. This friendship of the world. So James is using the term like he's doing with murder, in the sense of a spiritual picture. In the Old Testament, God's a husband, and Israel is the wife, and the Jews, being in a covenant with God, are represented as being espoused to Him. And so it was this idea of idolatry and infidelity toward God. And so he says, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity? Or this term refers to deep-seated opposition. You've put yourself in this position of aligning yourself with something that God has great antipathy for, or that God hates. Just go back to the Old Testament and see, anytime Israel aligned themselves with the worship of idols, they put themselves in direct opposition to God, something that God hated, and exposed themselves to the judgment of God. Friendship with the world, the term here is philia, like philos, or the love of the world. This is very close associations with. It's one thing that we have to be in the world, we have to live in the world, we have to work in the world, we have to exist in the world, but friendship with the world. This means that you share things in common. We're not talking about friendship evangelism here, where you have to have relationships with people, and but this is the idea of having this kind of shared affection with people, that it's of a preference for them over the things of God. You'd rather given a choice between the world and God, you'd rather choose them. You know, for example, if you go make this an equivalent with the Old Testament, and you're seeing Israel chose to worship idols rather than God. And so James is making that equivalent here. Friendship with the world. So you're giving lip service to God, but in your heart's really with the world. And he says this is just a very dangerous place to be. And what becomes the upshot of that? In other words, what's the result of that? And look at verse 5, because now really for the first time, you're seeing where James has talked about the life of faith as kind of representing this work of the Spirit of God, and the law of liberty as representing the work of the new birth and the Spirit of God and the dynamic nature of that life being manifested in you through the Spirit. But this is really the first time that James actually just says it right here. He says, or do you not think that the Spirit speaks for no purpose? He jealously desires the Spirit which he has made dwell in us. And he says that when you make that kind of a choice, when your heart deviates from the things of God, then you are misaligned with the Spirit of God that's in you. Doesn't this sound like Ephesians 4:30 and Paul and saying, grieve not the Spirit of God, where you're sealed unto the day of redemption, or 1 Thessalonians 4:19, stop quenching the Spirit, or Galatians 5:25, we're to keep in step with the Spirit. And this is all where we're just misaligned with the Spirit of God. That there's a jealousy there, or in other words, that God is deeply passionate about his relationship with us. And if we're going to defect over to idols, which is anything but him, God wants us solely for himself. And when we defect in some other direction, then it's going to cause all kinds of havoc spiritually. It's going to stunt our spiritual growth. It's going to decapitate our prayer life. It's going to cause fractures within the community, wars and fightings, and just look at the turmoil. Everything is going to disintegrate. So you reduce this down to the self-life. Whenever the self-life desires self-gratification, I, me, and my, your worst enemies, this is at the root of everything, is going to destroy your self-life. It's going to destroy your spiritual maturity, your growth in Christ, your prayer life, your relationships, ultimately your joy, your peace, everything. Chapter 3, verse 17, peaceable, gentle, reasonable, all that. You'll experience the opposite of that. So what's kind of the good news in this is that in verses 6 through 10, James says, wait a minute. Okay, but he gives greater grace. He gives greater grace. Greater capacity than for grace, he's saying. Therefore, he says, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So now James is going to reduce all this. You got all this noise and clatter of battle and all this confusion and chaos and distortion and issues and problems and everything else. And God says, hold it. There's a solution. in humility, you can get right with God. It says, therefore, submit to God. Resist the devil. He'll flee from you. And so he's not going to just sort of ratchet off these kind of commands in succession. And the same Holy Spirit convicting us of our compromise will also grant us the grace to serve God as we should. And this is important, that whenever we recognize that, wow, there's that pride that enters in that moment we can be convicted, we can confess it, we can forsake it, we can experience that rush of grace, we can humble ourselves, and we can have that restoration. We can, listen to what Spurgeon says. He says, in this as a comment, observe how weak we are, how strong he is, how proud we are, how condescending he is, how erring we are, how infallible he is, how changing we are, how immutable he is, how provoking we are, how forgiving he is. Observe how in us there is only ill, and how in him there is only good, yet our ill but draws his goodness forth, and still he blesses. Oh, what a rich contrast. God resists the proud. And at the same time, James reminds us that this grace only comes to the humble. So grace and pride are eternal enemies. Pride demands that God bless me in light of my merits, whether real or imagined, but grace will not deal with me on the basis of anything in me, good or bad, but only on the basis of who God is. Grace just kind of resets everything back to the point of my salvation. And that's where humility keeps me. Humility keeps me at the foot of the cross, ever remembering my identity in Christ. I am nothing, undeserving of grace. And yet by God and by God alone, he brought me to himself. Therefore, submit to God. In light of the grace offered to the humble, there is only one thing to do: submit to him. That's placing yourself under his authority, is what James has been advocating all along, under his governance, in submission completely to him. He created us. His rule is good for us. All resistance to him is futile. Resist the devil, he will flee from you. This is this antistemi. It's this to stand against, to set oneself against. You have to take a stand. Not one step further. And this is the idea. Detect when he is present, and yield no further. The idea of resist, this is the aorist tense. It means it's a situational thing. So it means that you have to be discerning in the moment. The idea of draw near to God is as well situational. So this is somebody who is very sensitive spiritually. And you're detecting when the moments are opportune and when you're susceptible to temptation. See, I'll draw near to God. He'll draw near to me. It's no good to submit to God's authority and to resist the devil's attack and then fail to draw near to God. Proximity to Him is critical and important. Worship, praise, prayer, asking counsel of God, enjoying communion with Him, spending time with Him. This is part of resisting the devil. It's an active resistance, not just saying you resist it. You're resisting him. It's active through your prayer life, through your devotional life, through your investment in other people, through your service to other people, through your active engagement in living out the Christian life. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. So as we draw near to God, we will be convicted of our sins. So we lament and mourn and weep as appropriate under the conviction of sin. This is just someone who is bathing their life with Scripture and with prayer and evaluating their life. And this reduces then down to what James says is, verse 10, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and He will lift you up. That's the remedy for a dead faith. Just humble yourself before the Lord. Let God exalt you. Let God be the one to, not your own self-gratification, not your own, I've got to make this happen. It's one thing to plan. It's one thing to, to pray and to prepare. And of course, you do all those things. I mean, the book of Proverbs certainly is a book of wisdom, and try to incorporate a lot of those things in your life. All that's important. But we bring all those things before the Lord and say, but God, you lead. You lead. You know, the 90th Psalm. I love the 90th Psalm and how that ends, Show me the work of my hands, and then you lead. So God has to do that. God has to take the lead, and He will do that, and He will do that faithfully. So verses 13 through 16 kind of finish off the chapter, and this idea of humble dependence on God. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to such a city, spend a year there and engage in business, but do you not know that your life, what your life is, like a vapor? And he talks about the fragility of life, and sort of the presumption on time. And the attitude that James challenges goes far beyond making wise plans for the future. Not let us go, but we will go, in the indicative mood. So these people, while they thought everything was at their disposal, used everything for worldly objects. We will today or tomorrow do such a thing or this, and yet he says, what is your life? It's even a vapor that appears for a little time and vanishes away. James does not discourage us from planning and doing, only from planning and doing apart from reliance on God. This is the balance. It's just, God, I'm fully reliant on you. Whatever. We never want to get impatient with God. If we see, things aren't just clicking and happening the way I thought, but it's okay. It's okay to stay in a holding pattern until God moves. Always wait upon God. I mean, just think of those Israelites, the pillar of cloud, they're just waiting upon God. God has His own time. God will provide in His time. All these things, to somebody my age, talking to somebody who's much younger, it seems like, okay. But, when you're young, it seems like everything has to happen all at once. And it's very difficult to wait. But I think that the best counsel and the most biblical counsel is always Wait on the Lord, be of good courage. He will strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. That's the best biblical counsel anybody can give you. And that's what James is trying to say. Your life is just a vapor. Your life is a vapor. God is fully aware of your circumstances, and He's in your tomorrow. He will take care of everything. So this is a living faith, a living faith. This is the life of liberty and the law of liberty and the Spirit of God manifesting the life of Christ in us. James has hard things to say, but James gets right to the point, and he puts his finger on the very things that can be so corrosive and destructive in our life, and we need to weed those out. But he gets right to the central things, like unity, and humility. Wow. Are we there?